It seems there have always been people who seek to rule over others all throughout history, and that there have just about always been people who resist such oppression. In the Passover story of Exodus, the Israelites are enslaved by Pharaoh and say they want to leave. They want a life of freedom. The story says that Pharaoh does not want to let them go. And God brings many plagues upon Pharaoh and his people. And finally, after much misery, gives in. And then when the time comes, the Israelites are actually often reluctant to leave the life that they know, for they don't know what comes next. Even though it's a place of oppression and suffering, it's pretty courageous to leave what you've always known and do something new, especially if you don't know what that new is going to be. Moses does eventually convince them, and their earthly journey is hard, described in the text as wandering for 40 years in the desert. Anybody felt that feeling of feeling like you're wandering in the desert for a long time? Mm-hmm. They're trying to figure out who they are now, what to believe. And they lose their faith from time to time that the promised land is there for them. They wander and they doubt. Are we there yet? You can just imagine the question. Are we there yet? Are we there yet? And in the Easter story, we learn about the teachings of Jesus, which speak of the kingdom of God. The use of the word kingdom, while many of us you use may bristle a little bit at that word, the word kingdom was intentional. There was one king of the Roman Empire. How dare this young Jewish man name the kingdom of God? Jesus had been traveling and teaching what he knew of how to be a good person, to be forthright, to care for others, to feed the people, to love God and love thy neighbor, and so on. And over time, the crowds that listened to Jesus grew, and this made certain government officials extra nervous. Jesus spoke out against what was wrong, and they tried to silence him. But Jesus was concerned with helping people get right with God, not specifically how other people were sitting, or how many people were sitting in the seats, or what other people were doing. Popularity was not the goal. His message was inspiring, and it gave hope to people, especially those who were often outcast or marginalized. And people showed up because they needed this message. And they needed to connect with others who were trying to make a better life. Truth is, Jesus gains in something much more important than being popular and was much scarier to the Roman Empire. He gains the people's trust. The people believed in his teachings, wanted to believe in a love that was larger than themselves. And they were inspired by his hope, moved by his convictions to live with integrity and spiritual depth. And having a spiritual leader one can trust is really important, whether you call it the kingdom of God or the beloved community. There are stories of times when hundreds of people show up for his teachings, and somehow loaves and fishes are enough for this large gathering. The story of him touching those thought to be untouchable, and they are healed. He upends tables when swindlers defile the sacred space. The local government is now quite concerned about the growing throngs who were coming to listen to this young Jewish man, and they began to investigate. So it goes, so often throughout time and even in our own day. People who become leaders, those who dare to question, whether it's the people in power or the practices of a day that award power to some and steal it from others. Leaders like Moses, Jesus of Nazareth, and some other names you may or may not know, but may wish to know. Michael Servetus, Abraham Lincoln, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, Dorothea Dix, Oscar Romero, Viola Liuzzo, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Marsha P. Johnson, Masa Amini. While not all advocates of justice lose their lives, many are threatened, harassed, often under the guise of civility or keeping decorum or restoring order. Lives are upended or just ended. Oppressors keep trying to silence truth, justice, and equity. Those who are the loyal followers and work alongside us are then thrown into turmoil. The work is there to be done, but also a colleague, a friend, a loved one has just had their life taken. And there is grieving to be done. And that takes time. Time that often feels like we do not have in our modern lives to properly grieve. They didn't have it in ancient times either. Jesus' disciples and closest confidants were scattered, fleeing, afraid of being swept up in the persecution by the Roman guards. Now, the four Gospels of the Christian scriptures tell this story with variations, as they are written by different authors at different time periods with different audiences in mind. This is important to remember. As Unitarian Universalists, it is less about the literal scriptures and more about what it's supposed to be teaching us. The Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, tell the story of Jesus' life and death slightly differently. But that's not really that uncommon, right? We all tell stories, family stories, the story that varies a little bit each year at the holiday, maybe some of those stories shared today, later at a group gathering. We tell the stories from our own perspective, or we make assumptions about what is happening and the meaning of them. We emphasize the things we think are most important to know, or maybe buoy our position. Yet we can also simply be using what is happening as a teaching moment. A story to guide and help a group of people find a sense of belonging and purpose. The four Gospels have different versions in part because they are geared towards different audiences. So how do we know what actually happened? Exactly. The scholars who have studied the historical Jesus probably sang once in a while, but they also learn more about the context, the history, the people, what was happening, and noticing how symbolism might change between then and now, and how a word translated then and now might mean something different. And while there may be certain historical commentary about what really happened is maybe not the best question. Perhaps it's more, what does this story say? And why was it important then? And why is it important now? Millions of people are celebrating the Easter story today. The brilliant UU minister, the Reverend Kendall Gibbons, wrote it this way in her poem, The Humanist Speaks of Easter. She says, there are only two things we know for sure. One, they stashed Jesus' body in a tomb temporarily until they could get a chance to bury it properly. And two, when they came back, the tomb was empty. Two things we know.
And if we go back a few days before that, it seems that Marcus Pontius Pilate, who was the governor of Judea, gave the order to crucify Jesus, a particularly cruel way to end his life and to make them an example to scare the people into submission. The Gospels tell variations on what happened next. After that tragic and politically motivated event intended to instill fear in the followers of Jesus, a wealthy man named Joseph approached Pilate and asked for Jesus's body. Joseph purchased new linen, a custom at the time, and carefully wrapped the body and placed it in a tomb, and with help rolled a stone in front of it to protect it until after the Sabbath, when they could engage in the proper burial rituals. The empire made its power known. It asserted its authority. It utilized the blunt tools of violence to get what they wanted. They tried to silence the resistance, to shut out the light. They tried to seal off the glorious morning of hope that Jesus promised was possible. The story says that Jesus was resurrected. In some circles, that means his spirit and body rose and instructed his people for how to carry on his work, and then he ascended to heaven. Reverend Gibbons continues her poem. I don't believe that the crucifixion is a story with a happy ending, or that it was a one-time event. It happens over and over as the human journey unfolds. It happens to us and the people we love. It happens to the righteous and the innocent. Crucifixion happens and it feels like the end of the world every time. It feels like nothing could matter anymore, ever. And then inevitably and miraculously, something happens next. Something happens. Of course it does, she says, because the world hasn't ended yet.
We have seen the rise of violence and fear all across the nation, have we not? Elected or otherwise official representatives of governments trying to control people's bodies, people's religious beliefs, creating fake news to distract us from truth, to limit reproductive freedom, to further the marginalization of Black, brown, Indigenous folks and other people of color, to destroy the earth, to discriminate and even criminalize love and gender expression. The people of Jesus' time had similar struggles. Jesus said there was another way to live. Exactly. La 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 la, grounded in love. Thank you for that dance. Exactly. Exactly right. He taught his disciples as he broke bread at that Last Supper that they had a role to play in carrying on that love. The story is important today because it reminds us that we who believe in life and love and mercy and justice have work to do. Whether we do it in Jesus' memory or Martin's or Sandra Bland's, we will not be silenced. We will not give up. We will rise because oppression is not the end of the story. We will mourn the dead and all that breaks our hearts, and we will carry on their work towards collective liberation. It won't be easy. If we do it right and faithfully, it will change our lives. There will be more losses along the way, I'm sorry to say, and we must learn to recognize that and love anyway. We must learn to recognize the way that fear divides us and instead lean into courageous connection. We must learn to recognize the harmful characteristics and behaviors of white supremacy culture that live inside all of us and in the communities in which we gather, not just in Tennessee, but everywhere. And rather than deny the racism that permeates everything, get real about it, get honest about it, and let's do something about it so that we can dare dismantle it. Because love will win the day. We, you, me, everyone here, from the smallest to the tallest, can be the Eastering. The celebration of joy, of beauty, of rising up out of the wreckage of pandemics and climate change and greed and police brutality and governmental hijinks and transphobia and heterosexism and patriarchy. We can't do this alone, though. We need one another. We need one another. Who are the people who inspire you to be better? Who inspires you to live your values in the wider world every day? Who are the reasons you get out of bed and try again, even though you may fall short? No, really, I'm asking, who are they? Call them into this space. Who are the people that help you be a better person? You are. Who are the people that you get out of bed for and try again? Yeah. When we get really clear on that, the world already begins to change. There are people who provide us inspiration. It is humble to be among you, to provide inspiration to one another. We can do this together for one another, in and beyond this circle, for one another's children and the children who will come after. We can rise when we choose to live a life of brave vulnerability, to learn more ways to be welcoming and inclusive, and to creating a sense of belonging. We together can resurrect hope, can resurrect love, if we rise.